Hello, honeys, and welcome back to the Bees-ness. This week we'll be discussing March 17th through the 23rd. Unfortunately, I was kind of hard pressed this last week to find a lot of interesting arts related headlines, so please bear with me as we go through what I did find. So, we do have a nice short episode here, very little to talk about, only a few headlines. And with that in mind, I thought I would dedicate a little bit of time here, right at the top of the episode, to talk a little bit about the inconsistency of our publications. To be completely honest with you all, I do have a harder time throughout the winter months. And I knew that when I began this podcast in September. Unfortunately, what I did not anticipate was having a perfect storm of other things going on in my life. There was some frustration related to my rugby career. Granted, that is not a professional career, but it is still important to me. I've had a hard time in terms of my professional life this last year, and I even just last week received some extremely disappointing news in regards to some potential career growth opportunities. And that is why this episode of the Beesness, as well as our planned Hepshepshut episode, have been delayed, is because your girl needed a minute to reset, recover, and come back from some seriously disappointing outcomes. So, bearing in mind that we are all human, we all have things going on that not everybody else knows about, I hope that you are willing to bear with me as I figure it out, as I continue to learn and grow this podcast. The delays are not because this podcast isn't a priority to me, it is. Reaching out to you guys, sharing this knowledge, enjoying art with other people, that is a priority to me. Unfortunately, life does not always recognize our priorities. And so I hope I can retain your support, even if I can't always give advance notice of when things might be delayed, or the simple fact that things might be delayed. Though I'm hoping to get that figured out soon. I will let you guys in on the fact that I am now searching for a sound editor to take some of the work off my plate. And I hope that with that transition, the schedule can be more consistent as well. As always, our complete source list will be available in a source document shared through the episode description. First up, let's talk discoveries and announcements. An artifact found by a metal detectorist in Wales was officially declared treasure last week. Metal detectorist Robert Edwards found a 300-year-old post-medieval silver thimble, which, upon further examination, was more specifically dated to between 1682 and 1740. He found the thimble while out with his device in a field near Pembrokeshire's 13th century Carew Castle back in 2020. Surprisingly, this object was only a few centimeters below the surface. Interested in learning more about it, Edwards gave it to Mark Lodwick, the finds coordinator for the Portable Antiques Scheme in Wales, who then sent it on to the National Museum in Cardiff for identification. The Cardiff Museum then declared it a treasure on March 13th, and the Art News announcement explaining such followed on the 19th. So why is this little tiny thimble such a treasure? Because it shows all kinds of cultural indications of what appropriate gifts were in the courting process at the time. It uses a basket weave pattern across 6 transverse bands, which was a typical design for the area and time. The special part of this thimble, though, is the engraving capitalized in Roman script along the bottom, which translates to, like enduringly, love forever. Inscriptions like this one were very popular on quote-unquote cozy items. aka small gifts between lovers. A spokesperson for the National Museum in Cardiff suggests that the logic could be that, like a ring, one wears the thimble on a finger, and that may be the sort of intimacy of the gesture. Another fascinating part about it is its interesting outcome. This thimble is about to start a museum bidding war. According to Art News, quote, in accordance with the 1996 Treasure Act, objects classified as treasures must be offered to sale for a museum at a price defined by the treasure valuation community before it is retained by the finder. Tenby Museum and Art Gallery, within just 10 miles of the field in which the thimble was found, has put forward its desire to acquire the thimble for its collection, end quote. A bidding war between museums would be fascinating for many reasons, one of which could include to see just how much they value certain objects. But of course, it could also be fascinating from the point of view of exactly which museums value it and why. News also broke last week that drones will be used to combat graffiti in certain sections of Washington after Governor Inslee signed a new bill. Governor Jay Inslee signed this House Bill 1989 last week into law, which authorized state transportation officials to use drones in their anti-graffiti efforts. The bill was initially sponsored by Republican Representative Andrew Barkis of Olympia. A prepared statement from Barkis, which ran in My Northwest magazine, says, quote, the explosion of graffiti in our state has become a serious concern that demands an immediate and comprehensive response. This bill acknowledges the frustration Washingtonians feel about graffiti on our roadways and sends a clear message that enough is enough. We cannot continue allowing the actions of a few to shape the narrative of our communities. A strong indication of the support behind this bill, both public and political, is that it originally passed the Washington House of Representatives on a 96-1 vote. The pilot version of the program is set to launch in early June. It will allow Washington State Department of Transportation to operate, quote, spray drone technology, end quote, in order to cover up existing graffiti. So, a quick breakdown of what exactly this bill proposes. The drones in question will be similar to ones already being used to treat agricultural crops and to battle wildfires. The bill also permits the use of state DOT cameras to identify individuals responsible for graffiti damage. The idea here is to increase efficiency and decrease cost through the use of the drones. The initial focus will center on the Interstate 5 from Tacoma to Seattle, then the North Spokane corridor of the same highway. So, why do we care about graffiti and drones and lawmaking? Well, in part because the effectiveness of this program is completely TBD. There's never been one like it. In a March 2023 blog post from Washington State Department of Transportation, the department reported that it spent $1.4 million on a 2-year span for graffiti removal. This includes labor, sign replacements, etc. However, drone experts and, regular users, nerds, one might say, point out that deploying drones to spray paint graffiti on pillars or walls won't be enough to eliminate the issue along Washington's smaller streets where signage is more frequently targeted. Others, particularly activists, have raised concerns about the use of cameras and ID technology, which has proven problematic and at times racist in past instances of use. By that, I am referring to various past cases wherein the technology misidentified someone, and that happened most frequently when the suspect was a person of color. Furthermore, this bill makes graffiti a misdemeanor. This is concerning as a potential form of censorship, but also because graffiti art and art in the style of graffiti has come to be recognized, especially because of Keith Haring, as a fine art form. To create a misdemeanor status for an art form
is a very, very hairy thing.
Last week's art news publication on the quote-unquote market-proof Rothko also revealed that collecting is trending back towards safer bets. Attention was first drawn to this phenomenon by the sale of a Rothko at Christie's last month for $100 million through a private sale, after the last sale of the work almost a decade ago for $186 million. Experts were quick to notice that this came after a strong November of 2023 multi-million dollar sales season of Rothko by Christie's, on top of a retrospective of his last fall and many market-defying sales in the last several months, specifically of Rothko by Sotheby's. Other mid-20th century abstract artists, namely Agnes Martin for $18.7 million recently, have been selling above market prices. These observations have resulted in a speculation that the market will, quote, shift towards reliable blue chip abstraction and away from wet paint contemporary pieces, end quote. Sotheby's own chairman of contemporary art, Grégoire Belot, says, quote, in a market which has been very much about young artists and figuration, I think it makes sense that abstraction seems to be moving to the forefront. There's something so quiet and serene and beautiful that works by Rothko and Martin give to viewers. I think today, in a world that is such a mess and so violent and so hard politically and socially, we need that, end quote. Of course, this shift in trends away from contemporary artists is very sad for yours truly, as one who specializes in that area. However, this also shows how much market influences art values and what precisely the effects of even social circumstance can have on auction prices, on what type of art is selling for what and at what time. Last week, it was also announced that the Metropolitan Museum of Art, despite having some resources already dedicated to these efforts, has hired its first provenance research head. Lucien Simmons, currently the vice chairman and worldwide head of the restitution department, as well as senior specialist for the Impressionist and Modern Art department at Sotheby's, has received the job. He has worked on restitution and provenance issues since 1997 and will begin his new role in May, leading a team of researchers and working with curators to do a provenance audit as well as research of all the objects in the Met's collection as well as incoming objects. Now, a quick reminder about what exactly provenance is. It is essentially the ownership history of an object. So the provenance traces who held a given artifact from its date of creation by whatever artist all the way to the current. The goal of all of this provenance research for the Met collections is to check and make sure that none of the objects are considered cultural property and that none of them have Nazi-era provenance, meaning none of them were looted by Nazis and later sold to whoever. There are several reasons I decided to include this story today, one of which is that this provenance research expansion is not only limited to modern or Western art forms. They're expanding that research team in the areas of Greek and Roman, Asian, Native American arts, as well as Egyptian. The sheer geographic scope of this provenance research really indicates that the Met is considering all objects on equal ground here, that they are just as invested in potentially looted cultural property from, say, the Dene people as they are from, say, the Qing dynasty. And this wide scope of effort is all the more exciting to see because of the sort of secondary reason why we're talking about this today, which is The Met is concerned with maybe fixing the smudges on its reputation, but more importantly, preventing future issues regarding cultural property. According to Art News, quote, the Met has faced scrutiny over the provenance of its 1.5 million holdings in the past, I assume. The creation of the position followed 6 seizures conducted in 2022 alone, with the Manhattan DA's office taking antiquities from Greece, Italy, and Egypt, totaling 1.1 million US dollars. The office also seized a $25 million statue of a Roman emperor that had been illegally removed from a Turkish archaeological site. I suppose what's most moving and most stand out to me as an art historian, as a creative professional about this whole thing, is the mutual respect that is shown by the museum in doing this research and taking it upon itself to do this research.
These efforts indicate a real emphasis on equity by the Met across its collections, and that is commendable. As I'm sure anyone who regularly uses social media saw, last week unapproved promotions for Beyoncé's Cowboy Carter album were projected onto several major New York museums. These included images, GIFs, and text. The institutions projected onto included the Guggenheim, the Whitney, the New Museum, and the Museum of Arts and Design. The projections made their appearance across New York City on Wednesday night, with Queen Bee herself dropping coordinates to the Guggenheim on Instagram as a hint. So, why do we care about Beyoncé's album, or projections onto museums? Because of the power of these projections, on top of the power of the Queen, of course. The press statements from almost every museum involved indicated that the projections were a surprise to them, but some joined in after the fact via social media posts referencing Beyoncé, the album, or the event. A lot of them are pretty funny, pretty good humor, but the one that I want to quote because I think it does the best job of summarizing why we're talking about it goes like such. Quote, while the Museum of Arts and Design was not involved in the activation, we are thrilled to see Beyoncé shining a light on the importance of museums in the cultural landscape. Insert snaps here. They go on to say, quote, her influence undoubtedly opens doors for even more people to explore and appreciate Black creativity, end quote. As this projection nodded to her previous music video with Jay-Z for the song Apeshit, which occurred in the Louvre and featured many iconic artworks within that institution. The Guggenheim, in its response, pointed out an interesting contrast here. They were not informed about and did not authorize the projection, but they did make a point to invite the public and Beyoncé herself to visit the museum in late May, during which time there will be projections by artist Jenny Holzer on the facade of the iconic building. Now, Holzer's text is traditionally anti-capitalist, very provocative, often consumer mocking. So this contrast of Holzer's work against the projection meant to increase the sales of Beyoncé's album is a really interesting coincidence here. All right, and next we've got a few more variety type headlines for you honeys. First of all, the portrait that made Henry VIII fall in love with Anne of Cleves has recently been restored to its former glory. The Louvre recently cleaned and conserved Hans Holbein's 1539 likeness of the Tudor Queen. And we're talking about that one. That painting is so important because it's the one sent to Henry that got him to say yes, not only to the dress, but to the bride herself. Holbein painted the portrait as part of Henry's search for a new wife following the death of his third, Jane Seymour, in 1537. He sent Holbein, who was his court painter at the time, abroad in order to basically send back pics of his potential brides. Unfortunately, though, when Anne of Cleves actually arrived, Henry's opinion quickly changed from yes to no, because basically he thought he had gotten catfished. As I have mentioned before, portrait artists did often make their sitters look just a little bit nicer in order to satisfy their customers, so it's possible. In any case, Henry VIII proceeded to marry her for political reasons, though a year later their marriage was annulled and she ended up living the rest of her life in a very privileged position at his court. The Louvre has housed the Holbein portrait since its founding in 1793. And it's important that they've undergone this work, they've done the restoration, because it essentially allows us to understand why Henry would have swiped right in the first place. It reveals the portrait's vibrant colors, previously hidden details that have long been covered by grime and gunk that has just built up over the years. Although previous findings have shown details like dotted underdrawing in Anne's bodice, which is a means of creating texture, now some of the tiniest buttons and the fine needlepoint of her dress, as well as the details of her jewelry, her true skin tone, the sheerness of the veil and lace around her head, and so much more is visible, as well as more three-dimensional. People News also noted last week that the Titanic's infamous floating door sold recently at auction for a whopping $718,750, thus beating the Indiana Jones bullwhip available in the same auction. The item sold as part of a 4-day auction last week, which drew in a total of over $15.5 million. That auction was called Planet Hollywood and was hosted by Heritage Auctions in Treasures. The door was the highest selling object at that over $700,000 price tag out of the 16 total props, including others from the Titanic movie, such as Winslet's final act dress and a telegraph prop. Other items available in the auction included the whip, of course, as well as the axe wielded by Jack Nicholson in 1980's The Shining. They also got hilariously specific about it in People magazine, saying, quote, "While the prop item is commonly referred to as the floating door by fans of the movie, the item is actually, inner quotes, part of the door frame just above the ship's first-class lounge entrance, per the auction," end quote. What's fascinating about this is that it shows how much low arts as well as fine arts can have in common when it comes to value based on cultural impact and interest. I mean, this is a door frame prop, but because Titanic is such a well-known, iconic movie, everything that has gone into it has achieved a fine art status, even though movies are considered a low art form. Knowing firsthand that the art world can often be snooty enough to consider movies entertainment, which is frankly, often a derogatory term in the art historical world, that's pretty impactful to see the Titanic pull in such a number. Finally, last week saw the announcement that a new Sailor Moon art book with creator illustrations, which will cover the entire history of the manga, is set to release. The book will be titled Sailor Moon Raizune Artworks 1991 through 2023. For those not familiar with Sailor Moon, as I admit I am not, the manga follows a schoolgirl named Usagi Tsukino as she transforms into the eponymous character to search for a magical artifact, the legendary silver crystal. In so doing, she leads the Sailor Guardians as they battle against villains to prevent the artifact from being stolen and against the destruction of the solar system. A secondary clarification point: though every manga is in some sense an anime, not every anime is a manga. That is because manga refers specifically to the literature subset of the stylistic genre known as anime. What's exciting about this new book is that it will feature creator illustrations, including ones that have never before been seen, and it will cover the manga's history since its inception. It will be a 200-page art book and contain 745 illustrations by franchise creator Naoko Takeuchi. The deluxe edition of the art book will even be released exclusively for members of the official Pretty Guardians fan club. What a cute name, I love that. Though this book is set to drop in Tokyo April 12th, the significance of the manga has already been recognized as demonstrated by its inclusion in the Library of Congress. It has multiple print, film, and TV spin-offs as well as adaptations. Ultimately, what's fascinating about this story and important about the release of this book is that it celebrates a specific style of art, Japanese art specifically, that has become an international connection point and phenomenon. All right, honeys, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you again for your patience with this long episode, especially with our honesty hour right up at the top. I know we don't usually have these run about 30 minutes, but I really felt it was necessary to be communicative with you all. So take care. Have a wonderful Easter weekend if you get to celebrate the holiday. Even if you don't, hope you have a good one. Take care of yourselves, honeys. This podcast was created, produced, written, hosted, edited, and fact-checked by Master's graduate Celia Bugno. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on all of your favorite streaming platforms as well as your social medias.